Good everyone, welcome to this video. Today we have another Should You Talisman episode. As per usual with this series, we take a look at vehicles that I have talismans on, and we also take a look at just whether these vehicles are worth talismaning or not. As we already know, we have obviously started on tanks, but of course we are going to be doing very similar to how I do the talisman series and the premium series, where we do one plane and one tank in that order. We're going to be talking about the weaponry, the flight performance, the competition of the aircraft, and also the conclusion at the end. If you wish to skip ahead to that, you can do so. Well, you can obviously skip ahead to the different parts if you wish, and you can do so in the description below. Without further ado, let us get into the weaponry / the engine, because we tend to take a look at that as well, of the F3F-2. The weaponry, of course, is the main selling point of this aircraft, which, other than its maneuverability, of course, which we'll get into that once we talk about the flight performance. This aircraft is armed with a single 7.62mm Browning machine gun and a single 12.7 M2 Browning machine gun. This is, of course, a very, very sufficient armament for this BR. The 30 cal could, of course, be a bit lacking, but the 50 cal is more than adequate. And given this thing's maneuverability and the ability to put guns on target rather easily, and, well, as you're going to see in the maneuverability part, this thing is extremely agile. So getting these guns to do some work is very, very easy. Of course, the engine of the aircraft is quite decent for its BR. Obviously, it's a little bit low on the power side for when you look at something like 2.3, but for a 1.3 biplane, I think this is the most powerful engine out of all the biplanes. It might be the second most powerful, I don't remember. But this plane has a lot of power for a biplane. It's quite good. This enables it to climb really well and set itself up to use those guns in a very, very easy way. In terms of extra weaponry, we do have access to a couple of bombs. Of course, these are the 100-pounders, which we're very familiar with throughout this series so far. And these are, of course, pretty alright. They're not obviously going to be killing stuff like M4 Shermans, which you might run into, given the entire game now has... Well, I say that, when this video probably drops, the entire game will officially... Well, the entire nations in the game will at least have one Sherman each, so... Yeah. Whilst you won't be destroying those very easily, you will be destroying the majority of the low-tier vehicles that you'll run into with these bombs. Of course, against something with armor, you will need to obviously get these bombs quite close to target, but given this thing's maneuverability, that is not going to be a problem. In terms of belts, the best belt for this is ground targets on the 12.7, as I mentioned previously before about 12.7s in the... or just in general. And for the 7.62, ideally you want to run stealth, but if you want to, you can run universal. This is most likely what most people are going to run, but I prefer stealth for this aircraft. Of course, the armament we've basically talked about in the P26A34M2, which is obviously what started this series for, in terms of planes anyway. And there's nothing really else to talk about, because the armament is the exact same as that pea shooter, including the bomb load. But, of course, that's not why we're here. We want to see the maneuverability of this aircraft, so let's go for a test flight and we'll get into that. I'll see you all shortly. And welcome to the test flight. Of course, there isn't really anything for us to drop our bombs on unless we fly 6 miles, which that would take a while. So, with these Navy planes, when it comes to looking them in talisman coverage, we are just going to be sticking near the carrier and just showing off the maneuverability and all that. So, obviously, because we took off from the carrier, that doesn't really give an idea of the takeoff run, but the climb angle of this aircraft that you can maintain 15 degrees of climb pretty comfortably with this thing. And the roll rate is okay. It's not, shall we say, like, it's not obviously top dog in terms of its roll rate. The rudder response, however, is extremely good, and the maneuverability is kind of batshit for what it is. Obviously, it's not the most maneuverable biplane. It's one of the most maneuverable. It's behind the Chica in terms of maneuverability. It's a bit lower than the Hawk 3, I would say. But the fact that you can just effortlessly bring this vehicle around onto target and just do your own thing, really. Like, it's maneuverable as fuck. Is an exercise in just how easy it is to get not only guns on target, obviously we are strafing a ship here, which isn't really relevant, but the fact is that this thing is just so agile to get things going. It's easy to maneuver onto target. It's easy to maneuver to drop some bombs. Like, if we was dropping bombs on this ship, again, obviously we're waiting for a reload for that, we would very easily be able to swing our bombs onto where we want them to go. For example, if I want to bomb that front turret, it's very, very easy to do so. Obviously, you wouldn't be bombing proper ships like this, but the point is that this thing is just so damn agile, you can really get this thing to do the work that you want it to do. If you want to fight planes, you fight planes. If you want to attack ground targets, you attack ground targets. It's very simple, and it's very easy to get this plane to do work. Given the performance of it as well, and the horsepower, you can mostly match anything that you'll come across, other than a Chica in a turn fight, plus maybe some of the Japanese planes. And it's just that maneuverable. Like, there's nothing really to write home about in terms of its other capabilities. Like, it's still very consistent, and it's a joy to fly. There is literally nothing I can really say bad about it. It's just that consistent and that fun to fly. So, let's go take a look at this aircraft's competition, because there really is not a lot that can stand up to this thing. See you in a moment. And welcome back to the hangar. As I've already mentioned, if you've obviously skipped here, that's not going to be relevant, but if you've just come back from the flight performance and the handling, the aircraft's solid. It's fast, it's maneuverable, it has great guns, its roll rate is a little bit low for what it could be, but everything else about it is just top notch. In terms of what aircraft really stand up to try and take its crown as arguably the best rank 1, there isn't many. There's obviously the P-36C Hawk, which is good. The SB-2-3, which is pretty solid, but a bit underpowered. And the TBD Devastator. Those are the only ones that I could really say, with a certainty, could stand up to the capability of the F3F. Obviously, each vehicle that I've mentioned just now has its advantages and disadvantages over the F3F. In the case of the Hawk, you have higher top speed and better armament, and you also trade maneuverability in the process, not by a lot, because the P-36s are quite agile, but that's not the point. You also trade a bit on the climb as well. The SB-2-3, which obviously I've mentioned as well, that obviously trades flight performance for an air spawn, which is very useful, and it gains 4 50 caliber guns in the front and a 50 cal in the back. And just overall, it's also getting a bigger bomb load as well, which obviously we've covered it in the SB-2 Should You Talisman. But you get a naval mine, you can take some smaller bombs, you can take a big bomb. It's just all benefit. And then, of course, the TBD, which, when this video likely releases, this aircraft will have some new payloads. From what I've seen, it's getting 3 500s. So that'll probably be here. I'm not sure if you'll have to respade it. You probably will. But that'll depend on what Gaijin thinks. And if it does get 3 500s that drop separately, the TBD is going to be excellent for ground attack. Sure, it's quite big, it's slow, and it's obviously quite fragile, but you do still get that 50 cal, you still get a 30 cal on the back, and if you want to do some carpet bombing, you have 12 100-pounders to do it with. And you can also swap out a few of those bombs for some 500-pounders, which you can use secondary weapon selection to drop these on something that might need these bombs directly on target. And given the TBD's maneuverability, you can easily do that. But now we come to the conclusion, because, as I said, there isn't really much for me to say. If you really need a rank 1 talisman, this is your plane. 100%. Now, of course, I've already listed off the advantages and disadvantages of the other vehicles in the competition. If you've just skipped to the conclusion, which, fair enough, You can go back and look at that if you want, but I'll briefly summarize it in case you obviously skipped here. The only real competitors obviously do have some. They do trade quite a few differences, especially the bombers that I've suggested, like the SP-2-3 and the TBD. Those trade speed and overall handling for more firepower and/or bomb load. Whereas with the P-36, you trade this thing's maneuverability, not by a huge amount, but you also trade the bombs, and you do gain some extra guns. But as I said, there's not a huge amount of difference between the competition here. And personally, if you really want a rank 1 talisman, as I said, this is your plane. Now, if you started USA, you will get Gala's F3F for free. So in that case, do not talisman the F3F. If you really want another talisman just to add a bit more spice, go for one of the vehicles I've suggested, the P36C, the SP23, or the TBD. But if you don't, definitely talisman this thing if you really want something. You save around 60 GE. You're not really going to be grinding SL with this thing anyway, so if you really want the SL grind, just buy Galas for 60 GE more on top of the talisman. But yeah, what can I say? This plane is absolutely awesome, and if you really, really just want to just club some seals or just do some low tier grinding, you have the plane of choice right here from me. This is the plane I would pick. But anyway, on that note, I'm going to leave you all to it for today. I know this is a bit of a shorter episode than what you would expect, but as I said, this is the king of rank 1 talismans for USA, at least in my opinion. But anyway, I'm going to leave you all to it for today. I hope you enjoyed seeing the F3F-2. The next vehicle in the series is going to be something a little more interesting in terms of its, shall we say, look, so to speak. It is the PBY-5 Catalina, which I think we're going to be okay with this one, but obviously, when it comes from jumping from an F3F to this, again, there are advantages and there are disadvantages, but there is something about the Catalina which I think is definitely going to make it consistent in its capability. But anyway, I'm going to leave you all to it for today. I hope you enjoyed seeing the F3F-2 in the Should You Talisman series, and I will see you all on the next one.